project number 5. And I think this is a pretty good one because it's about input. And basically everyone had to at some point in their life do some filling out of the form online. And so I think it's fun to see how this is handled behind the scenes and how this manipulated it, how JS knows that you've entered the correct password and how they know what to do next, what content to show. So basically this is our tiny application, and there's only one input. What is the best password in the entire world? It's a user. So basically, if you enter a user, there will be a message for you. Today is your day, that's my message for you. Let's stay optimistic. And cool. So basically, that's it. It's going to be developed over time in this project. It's going to go a little bit more complex. And as you can see, main.js is completely empty, so we're going to start everything from scratch. Index.html has in the body tag, we have a input, and you can see that type attribute. And normally I do realize that if you are being asked to enter a password, the value of the type attribute is also going to be a password, so that the letters are covered with either mini stars or mini dots depending on the browser. But I think for the sake of everyone involved, including myself, it's best if we all will see what I'm typing on here. So the actual letters. There is a label that is not exactly necessary, but I think it's a nice touch. And if you have that for attribute set to the same value as the ID, it's correlated. So basically I don't have to press on the actual input to get inside. I can press on that enter password, meaning the label for it. And it's also going to send me inside that input. Cool. And if we enter the correct password, there will be a nice big message showing on the screen. So as far as the styles are concerned, nothing special happening in here. It's just some margin, text align center to make it look decent. Font family, some styles for input. And as you can see, the div has a border of 2 pixels solid black. And if there is a message, I will refresh that. If there is a message, there is a nice frame, but if there is no content in the div, it's going to become this flat line. That's it. Message at the moment is an empty div because this is all going to be handled by JS. So this is it. Let's begin, shall we? Main.js. So the first element we definitely need to be stored somewhere is our input. So let's create a variable input and document get element by ID this time. Do you remember what the ID was? It was pass. Don't remember? Let's go back. There is an ID for input and it's called pass, short for password. Cool. So we will definitely want to know what the value inside the input. So whatever is someone is typing in here, we want to be able to access this value. And to do that, we will do input addEventListener. And here we have quite a few options. The first one will be key up. Key up is slightly different from key down. Whenever you press the key, the next thing you do is releasing the key, and so that's the key up event. So the second parameter, we will pass our function. I'm going to use an arrow function, open curly braces just for the readability of the code. And let's put our E in here so that we are able to access any properties or anything that is available from that object event. And here we're gonna do a console log just to see if the correct value is being stored, if we are able to access the value. So we're gonna work on the event object. Then target is the thing that we're currently working on, so the input, instead of putting input because we cannot do that. And then normally to access the property of text, there's this text content, but it's not applicable in the input. So we're gonna do a value and save it. Now, every time I release a key, so first I'm pressing the key and then I'm releasing the key, we should be able to see the new value being stored in our input. And so this is how it works. And it would be perfectly fine to use in our program, but there is even more adequate event. And it's called input. If I do input event and now pressing like new letters, we can see how the state of the input is changing, and we can see that every time this event is detected, a new value is being console logged. A new value we can see in the console. There is one more event that is not actually very useful for now and on this occasion, but I still want you to see how it works. I'm going to save it. Now the change works this way, that I'm going to enter something, and then if I click on anything else, any other element on the website, then this is detected as a change. I can go back and type something else, something more, and then press enter, and again this is detected as a change. But we won't work with this event, we can work with an input because it's the best for our purposes. Cool. So what else do we need in here? Probably we need some password, because we need to make sure that the password is the same as the input value. And let's stick to the user, since it is the best password in the world. And we also need the message that we want to show if the password is correct. And I'll do I quit with lots of exclamation marks. Oh. And now let's comment this out, because we don't need a console log, we need a program to work. So we want to make sure that whatever is being entered here matches the value of a password of our data that is being already set. So I'm going to use a simple if, and the password triple mark equals, and now access the eTarget value. And now what is supposed to happen if the password matches the value? The message is supposed to be shown in our div. In order to fill out the div, we need to grab it. So we could do a document, a query selector, document query selector, and the div had a class of message. So I'm gonna do dot, because it's a class, and a message. And we could actually make it even neater and create a separate variable for our div, and just copy this there. So our element is stored in that variable div. We remove this from here, and refer to a div. And if we want div to show a text inside, we need to access its text content property and set it to message. So let's see how this works. If we enter now our user password, we can see that the message is showing on the screen, I quit. Cool. In our project, as not our finished project, but our first step, as you can see, there is a black background when I click on the input. So how can we achieve this? Basically, there are other events. Whenever you are inside the box, it's called focus. When you leave the box, it's called blur. So these are two other events that we're going to add on here. Again, we're going to work on an input, add event listener. And the first event that we're going to listen for is a focus. Again, an arrow function, curly braces. And in here, we want to access the target. So we are working on the input, but we are unable to say just input. We need to access it by target. And then we will, because we didn't work much with classes, let's do it by a class. So we're going to do something like add class, and we're going to call this class active. We're going to add class active that is going to be storing styles in the index.html file. So let's add another class in here. And let's do a background color. Black. And the color of the font, white. Maybe not the most original combination, but let's do this. And so we are adding another class for the class list of the input. Let's see if this works. Hopefully it does. Is not defined. Of course, I didn't pass the parameter inside the arrow function, so it doesn't know where to find it. Well, let's save it again. And now when I'm going to the box, it's gonna be black, but unfortunately when I'm leaving the box, it's staying black. And I don't want it to stay black. I want it to be changing to its original default value. So basically, we need to take this class away. And we're gonna say, not on focus, but on the other event when we leave the box. So blur is when you leave the box and you're not longer inside the input. So here I'm going to click on outside, click on inside, click outside, click inside. Everything works as expected. Cool. So I will see you in just a second. We're going to develop this project further. Okay, so before we move on and complicate this project with multiple passwords and multiple messages, we need to make sure that we took care of the tiny details for our intro mini application. So the first thing, as you can see in the original one, as soon as we enter the correct password, the message would show on the screen, but the actual password would disappear. And so that's first thing we need to fix or add. So basically we say if the password is matching what the user has entered, we want to show the message, but we also want the target value, so the content of the password, the content of the input, to disappear. So target value equals empty strings. So this should fix the problem. So we enter a user, we can see I quit, but the actual password has disappeared. And the second thing is that we want the message to go away, to disappear as soon as we enter incorrect password. And this is going to be dealt by the else, if else statement. So now else, we're gonna use that div text content. So the div that is supposed to store our message, we now want in every other possible scenario. So when the password is not matching, or the input is not matching the password, we want it to be an empty string. We want it to be nothing. Basically here, I'm gonna enter a user. We can see the correct message. The user has disappeared, and now that I want to put something else, the message has also disappeared. Perfect. So this is like the final touch on the intro project. And before we go on, we have to discuss one but very important thing. So I'm gonna comment this out and move it downwards. So basically, we have that method addEventListener in the input that takes two parameters. One, event that we're listening for, and the callback function that is going to be called every time the event from here is detected. Why am I talking about this? Because so far I've been using the arrow function, and I said you also can use the anonymous function that is created with the keyword function, and instead of arrows there is nothing. Basically that's the alternative, and in this very project it won't make any difference whether you go for the anonymous function or an arrow function, but further on in the future it will make a difference, especially when you go and study React. It will be very important. So basically, I'm gonna also copy this console log from here. Uncomment and uncomment. Do you remember when we talked a little bit about the keyword this? So basically this is pointing at an object that we are working on. So if we're creating a function working on some object, this is going to point at that object. And so basically here, if I do, instead of target value, I'm going to remove value from here. I'm going to remove this altogether, and I'm going to put this, and we'll see what is the thing that it's gonna be console logged. So I'm gonna anything. We can see that both console logs are pointing at the same input. Input ID pass type text class active. Cool. So both console logs pointing at our input. But if we change back to our arrow function, save it, and let's do the same thing, exact same thing. I'm gonna enter A. Now first console log target, that is our input, is pointing at the input, but the context of this has changed. So this on line 8, when we changed function from the anonymous to an arrow function, is now pointing at a window. So the context has changed. When we create function using a keyword function, it's going to create context for this. So it's going to point at input. But when we do an arrow function, the context is changing because the context is inherited. So it's no longer created in here in input, but it's actually pointing at something higher. So in this case, window, more global context. And so maybe at the moment you don't see any importance, because how often do you use that word this? But it turns out pretty often. And it's a very nice, pleasant tool but also a little problematic because the context of this is changeable depending on how you decide to create a function. So this is something not that we're going to use in this project, so perhaps it's not even that important, but I need you to make that mental note and kind of notice it, and just kind of like just make the mental note that there is a difference. And when the time comes and we talk about the object-oriented programming, this is going to be super important. If we change the value, value, and add a value for here, enter anything, it's going to be undefined because window doesn't have a value, so it's going to be undefined. And the value of an input is a. Cool. Okay, so as you can see, main.js exactly the same as it was, and so we have to think how to make it more interesting from the programmatic point of view, and also because it's for educational purposes. Basically, we so far dealt with only one password and one message, and we need to know how to handle more data. So I'm going to add one more password and one more message. And we could do it with objects, but because I want to work on arrays and show you the methods for arrays, I'm going to create an array and add one more password. It's going to be summer, and the same for messages. Also creating an array and adding a message for summer, which is going to be hot. Cool. Also, to make it grammatically correct and not only focusing on the programming, passwords and messages. Cool. The part of the previous solution I'm gonna take out from here and comment out so that we can have a fresh start. And instead of eTarget value from here, I now want to have it in a separate variable called text, and the text is now storing eTarget value. So basically, let's think what we have to do in here. We still have to make the comparison, so we need to find out whether whatever the person has entered in the input is matching our password. But now, because we have more passwords, we need to search through those passwords. And luckily for us, we have now forEach method, which is going to take an arrow function, and as one of the parameters, we're going to introduce element. Normally, or many times, you will see something like this that stands for an element because it's looping over, iterating, and looking at every individual element. Because we know that individual element in our array is a password, so that's what we're going to do in here. We're going to say password, and because it's just one argument, we can remove the braces. The rest should be okay. So we're just going to copy this and paste it in here and comment this part and save it. Instead of eTarget value, we said we're going to work on text. So let's make that comparison to text, and let's see if this works. Got a user. Unfortunately, there is a reference error because here we are trying to show one individual message, and we no longer have variable message available to use. We can instead access messages. So let's see how this solution would work. Let's put user again, but unfortunately we are getting the content of the entire array instead of one individual message that was there for this specific reason. We only wanted to see I quit, but we can see everything. I quit and hot, hot, hot. So this is not exactly what we wanted to achieve in here. But again, luckily for us, for each method takes up to 3 arguments, parameters. First one being the element. The second one is the index. Now that we use 2 arguments, we need to wrap it in the bracket. And how does it work? So basically it takes one element by one, and at the same time, when it takes one, let's say the user, so it takes the user, that's the element, and at the same time the program will memorize that it's at index 0. And so later on we can use that index for whatever we need. We know how to access any specific element in an array, and it's this way, indicating which index. And so let's see how our solution works now. I've entered user and I get one individual message that was created for that password, I quit. Let's do summer. Again, hot, hot, hot. So it works perfectly. What if we wanted to add this else? So when there is a wrong password being entered, or like we want the thing to disappear. So I'm gonna again copy this and paste it in here and save it. To make it a little bit more interesting, let's add some more Joe, and okay, do not hate me. Okay, so we have this solution now. We're checking if the password is matching the text, meaning our input value. If so, we want to show the individual message, and in case it isn't, we want the message box to remain empty. So let's try our luck. User disappears, nothing's happening. Then maybe better lag with summer. Unfortunately, no message here either. And so let's try with Joe. Okay, so Joe is actually letting us see the message, do not hate me. But so what happened here is that forEach will take that every single individual element, and let's say it's taking the user. It says, okay, password is matching the input, great. It's placing the I quit message onto the box, but it doesn't have time to spare because it's a forEach. It has to go on to the next element, and it's all happening so quickly that we cannot see it. But basically, it works. It's just not the exact, like the outcome that we're looking for. And so it's going on to the next element, summer. It's finding that it's matching the text. Fine, cool. But it's even showing this message for like a mini fraction of a second. But then it has to go on and check all the other elements in the array. And then when it comes to Joe, it's the last element in the array, so it doesn't go anywhere further. And so that's why we can see that message, do not hate me, and it works as intended. So basically here we have to kind of like resign from having an else statement, erase it altogether, and instead we can clear the message box every time and new input event is going to be detected. So let's save it. And let's see how this works now. User, I quit, great. Summer, hot, hot, hot. And Joe, do not hate me. Cool. So our task, I think this is done. And I see it at the next project. Yeah, and what kind of project would that be if there was no homework for you to do on your own? So basically, it's not super easy one. It's like loads of things that we've already done together, and you have to go through the materials and maybe add something for yourself. I've included a mini hint. So basically, we now have password and passwords array, and as you can see, the letters are like, one is a capital letter, the other one is a small letter, and what I need you to do is to make sure that the program makes it case insensitive. So basically the program is case sensitive. If I enter 1 but I misspell E and I make it a small letter instead of the capital E, it won't let me see my message, and I need it to be case insensitive. So it doesn't matter what the size of the letter is entered in the input, it will show the message anyway. So my hint for you is that there is a to uppercase or to lowercase method. And so if you impact those elements in the array to make them all small before comparing all small or all big letters, then the program will not see the difference. So that's my hint for you. And also index.html is pretty much the same thing, maybe slightly slimmer. And here I already placed addEventListener attached to the input with the right correct input event, and show message function that is referred, that's the reference, and this is where you have to write your message. So your entire code, your entire solution should be placed here. Okay, good luck. As it's often the case, and the same goes for JS, there are many different ways to have the same outcome. So I'm going to show you like a few possible options how to deal with this task, and I'm going to start with the easiest one. So again, a user is entering a password, and we need to make sure that the password is a match, and if it's the same as one of the passwords from our array, this is a match, and then a message can be displayed. And in this scenario, we have we used different sizes of letters. So we need to instruct JS to be case insensitive for a change, because it always pays attention whether you use a capital E or a small e, capital T, etc. So in this case, we want JS not to pay any attention to what case has been used. And we'll start in the same way as before. So we're going to work on our passwords array. We're going to use forEach method. In here, we will we'll try to access elements. So I'm going to put an item instead of a password to make it slightly different. And next, we have to make the comparison. So we are comparing if item is exactly the same as the target value, meaning the value of the input, whatever has been entered in the box. If it's the same, then I'm no longer storing a div here in the variable, so I'm going to just access it directly from here. Go document, query selector, and I'm gonna access div. Again, straight away go to its text content property and give it a value of. We now know that we need to access a specific message, not the whole array. So we need to do messages, no messages, messages, and introduce index. So here again, we have to add index as well. And let's check how this solution is gonna work for us. I'm gonna enter 1 and nothing is happening. Why is that? Because we took care of the task, but we did not care for one teeny detail, which is the most important one in here. We did not care for making sure that this can be recognized. So let's check if it's spelled correctly or it's spelled exactly as it is in here, then it's gonna print out the correct message. But so we need to make sure that the JS is now no longer paying attention to this capital O, etc. So as the hint suggested, we need to make sure that before we compare the elements, we transform them. So we use method to uppercase. It doesn't matter if you do a lowercase or to uppercase, we just need to make sure they are the same on both sides. So we are comparing this value and this value, and both values need to be changed to uppercase or to lowercase if that was your choice. Let's now have a look if anything changed. 1 all spelled in capital letters, printing excellent, perfect. And now let's say 2, and it works displayed to our eyes. So beautiful, simple solution. forEach used, looping over, needed to remember that the first one is the element that we are taking, iterating over, and the other one is index. And we have to put in here as the second parameter because we need to access a specific index in the messages. Oh. And in a second, you'll see another way to deal with it or to handle it or to address the issue. So I'm gonna see you in just a bit. I'd like to show you another way to handle our task. So basically, again, we're gonna use a forEach, and this time it's gonna be a slightly different approach. So basically, again, this is not the most optimal, so this is not an ideal perfect solution because I want to interfere with our array of passwords. So basically I want to alter the elements in here, and well, technically we should not like modify the original array, but we are going to do it this time. So basically we're gonna work on passwords again and do a forEach. Inside we need to pass a callback function. I'm gonna use an arrow function, and here, as we know, we're gonna work on a password and a single individual element. So we're gonna do a password. And so what do we want to achieve here is basically that we want to modify the elements, so all the strings, into either uppercase or lowercase. And then inside our function show message, instead of doing the modification here, we want to already have the elements ready, like all the capital letters or all the small letters, so that the size of the letters doesn't matter anymore. So what can we possibly do in here? Is that we're gonna do, if we are working on every individual element, we could assume that we will take a password and we do to lowercase, and it should work, right? I'm gonna do console log of password and see what happens. So unfortunately, as you can see the result here, we have 1 and 2 still spelled as the original elements in our original array, meaning this thing happened. So the method worked, it changed the elements 1 and 2 to lowercase, but it didn't modify the original array. So basically it worked, but not the way we want it to work. So we don't modify, in this way we cannot modify the original elements. So I'm gonna make sure that you see that it worked. I'm gonna console log both. So you can see that the first console log changed the password to lowercase, but the second console log on line 7 returning the actual password from the array is still the same. So we did not do anything for our project. Cool. So let's remove that console log. We always said that if we want to use a value or a variable later on, we need to assign it to a variable. So what would happen if we do a password equals password to lowercase? That would kind of make sense to use the element we are working on and assign it with a new value. So let's do console log, and perfect, it seems it's working. So we have 1 and 2 all spelled with lowercase. And if I do now console log our array, just to double check that all the elements are modified, unfortunately, again, we will see that the original elements are still the same. So we kind of like, we took that element, we assigned it with a new value, but what is happening inside the function stays inside the function, and we never had any impact or any effect on the original values. So 1 and 2 still spelled in a funny way, and only the password inside our function is spelled with lowercase as we intended. What should we do now? Well, maybe if we, instead of like changing one individual password, we try to reassign our array with the new value, then it could work. Let's save it. So straight away you can see some message in red, meaning the assignment to constant variable is not possible. Meaning, first of all, we used const here, so we cannot assign a new value, but also because passwords is an array, and here we're trying to like assign a single element to our array, so it wouldn't work for multiple reasons. Okay, so what would be the next step? Well, as before, we were using the parameter of index, we could maybe perhaps do the same here. So basically, make a reference to an index. So when the specific password is taken into consideration, like forEach takes every element individually one by one. So it will take the password 1, it will memorize the index 0, and then in our array, when we say that we want to specify that index that has been memorized, and then assign the specific value to that specific element, and then maybe perhaps then we can change our array. So if we do that, and here I'm going to try to console log straight away our individual elements in the array and see how it goes. So it seems that finally we have been successful. So let's just check to be sure that the original array has also changed. Passwords. As you can see, passwords is the original array that I'm printing the elements of in the console, and you can see that everything is spelled with lowercase. So we finally influenced or modified our original array, and it's finally with all lowercase. So you can see that it wasn't as straightforward, but if you kind of like engage your brain a little bit and make the use of all the information that we gathered so far, so that we take into account every individual element one by one. At the same time, program is capable of memorizing the index, and we can get to every individual element of our array using the index and then assigning a new value. This way we can actually modify the original array. Again, this is not the perfect solution because normally we should not interfere with the original data. Whatever is set, it should stay the same and not like as creating a function that is modifying it. But for our purposes, it was said that the program is supposed to be in case insensitive, so I think we will do no harm here. And the last thing that we have to do is to make our show message function to actually work. So I don't want to make this comparison here. Target value, I want to take it out from here, and I want to create a new const input just to make things slightly different from every assignment, to make it like you can see the difference, and when you go back to kind of revise materials, it doesn't look all the same. Cool. So go and input with the value of eTarget, and instead of the uppercase method, we're going to use two lowercase this time. And this now is going to become an input. So we are comparing to an input item. Let's change item to a password. So again, it's slightly different to the previous one. So what did we do now? We so far assigned the value of the input to a const input by doing eTarget value to lowercase, and then so it's already like the input will be modified when we do the comparison. Password, as we know, now we're working on this passwords array, but it's been already modified. This is the modification that is happening here. And when we apply, like when we work on it again with our forEach method, it's been already modified. So this passwords here has been already modified, and we receive all lowercase elements. Cool. Then if password, so we don't have to do to lowercase anymore because it's already been done. Let's see, password equals input, then document query selector, div, because we are looking for the div and accessing its text content. So we need to access its inside and give the actual specific message. Here we don't do anything different to what it was already before, like in our show message previously. So let's see how this works. Let's save it. Let's shrink that DevTools a little bit. I'm gonna open this slightly. And if I'm gonna do one small works, capital works, refresh. I'm gonna do two spelled in a funny way. And everything seems to be working just fine. As you can see, this is not as super easy that if you go for the first solution that pops in your head, it's not always the solution or the thing that is going to work. So forEach works on every single element, but it will not modify the original value. So we can work with the modified value inside that function, but we cannot impact the original values unless we assign the new values by accessing every individual index. And there is another solution that is going to be probably the best out of those three, and we're going to use a map method, which actually works in a very similar way. So it's a very similar mechanism, but it does return it does return a value, and you'll see in just the next video. The third, and I think the most excellent solution for our task, is to use a method of map. Map is very similar to the forEach in its construction or mechanism, but it turns out it works very different. So I'm going to make a mini presentation. I think it's going to be easy to understand. I'm going to create an array with some random numbers. So let's say 2, 14, and 5, and do a map on it. Inside here, as a parameter, I'm passing a callback function. I'm going to use an array arrow function. An arrow function here, as we know, we have to specify what element we are working on. Since this is an array of numbers, I'm going to say number. If it's only just one parameter, we get rid of the braces. And here I want to do number times 2. So I want to take every individual number and multiply it by 2. I'm just going to copy this whole thing and paste it in the console so that you can see the result. As you can see, we got 4, 28, and 10, and it's in an array. So we got an entirely new array. And just so you know, the old array remains the same. So there's no modification done to the original array, but we can get a new array with new numbers, with new values. As opposed to the forEach method, I'm going to show you as well to compare the results. You can see that the forEach looks exactly the same. We just swapped map for the forEach, and we are getting an undefined. Basically, it does the operation inside a function. Whatever we needed it to do, it happened, but we are not getting the returned value. Map works differently. So we are getting a new value without modifying the original one. Very useful. As you can see, this is very easy to read. It's a one-liner. Normally, when we create an arrow function, usually I put curly braces here, and then I put this on the new line and this on the new line. So it's like also very neat and easy to read. However, there is a slight difference when we use that map, because map returns something. So if we use those curly braces, it's gonna expect a word return here. If I do this, I'm gonna save it. I'm gonna copy paste it again here, and you'll see exactly the same result. So I'm getting a new array with new values. However, if I'm gonna get rid of that word return, which I normally didn't use when I applied forEach, and I'm gonna copy this, paste again, you'll see something. It's not gonna be the same thing. So basically we are getting an array of 3 elements, but those 3 elements are undefined. And it's because of this structure. It is required that if we use the curly braces here, we need to include the keyword return. Otherwise, this is not going to work. So it's a nice tool or a nice gift from, let's say, JS creators, that we can use it, put it in one line, very easy to read, and does exactly what it needs to do. So returning a value, but we need to remember, we need to be aware and kind of conscious that if we do a map and we want to return a new value, so a new array, we either use the curly braces, but then do not forget about the keyword return, or you can put it just in one line like this, with no spur braces, no brackets, and no keyword return necessary in this case. Okay, so that's the difference between map and forEach. And it's gonna make it easier. Like the second solution, you've seen that it's a little complicated. It's not very difficult to understand, but it's definitely a lot of like typing if we want to alter the original array. In here, we don't have to alter anything. The old passwords is gonna remain the same. We're just gonna create a new one and assign it to a new variable. So let's do this. Got passwords. I'm gonna do a map. In this case, I'm no longer working on the number, so I'm gonna change it to L. That stands for an element. Yeah, I'm gonna do L here. And instead of multiplying it by 2, I want to do a to lowercase method. So here, I've created all new elements to lowercase c, and you can see that there is a new array 1 and 2. Remember, the original passwords array has not been modified. So if we want to be able to use this in our show message function, we need to create a new variable, say short lowercase password, and assign it to our new value. So this LC passwords, lowercase passwords, will take the value of this array from here, 1 and 2 spelled with lowercase. And now that we have it stored in LC passwords in our new array, without modifying the original array, we can do our solution in show message, meaning that we want to compare the passwords all in lowercase to the input, also turned into lowercase. I'm gonna create a const called input and store my input in here, which was target value, and I also want to change it to lowercase. So I'm storing here, and instead of a forEach, I'm gonna do a simple for loop. So here we're starting from index 0. We want our loop to go as long as the length of the LC passwords goes. So less than LC passwords length, And also we want it to increment by 1 every time. Cool. Inside here, we want to compare if our text input is the same as the LC passwords every individual element. So we have to put index in here. And if that's the case, we want to make sure that the right message is being shown here. So again, we take our query selector to store div, access its text content property, and make sure that the right message is stored from our array of messages. So again, we need to refer to a specific index with I. Save it. Code got formatted, so it looks beautiful again. And now, the moment of truth, we're gonna check if it works. I'm gonna do 1 all in capital letters, and it works. Perfect. If we do 2 spelled in a weird way, it works. So, meaning everything works. And from this class, I want you to remember that. I know we're all kind of tired of this project, but I need you to remember that map doesn't modify the original array, it returns a new array. forEach doesn't return anything. You can use it to operate on the element and kind of make the use of it inside the function, but it's difficult, or it's like more complicated to make just a new array with those new values. And I will see you in just a second doing new project.